When I was in the 10th grade, I got my second girlfriend. Almost. So here's the story. It was my it was a sophomore year, and I got to school on the first day, and there was this new girl in school, and I noticed her in the cafeteria because the teachers had us all sit in the cafeteria before the first bell, and I was sitting with my buddies, and then I saw her, and I thought that she was really pretty, and I was looking at her, and my buddies, they were looking at me, and they were like, "Do you have a crush on her?" And what I should have said was no. But what I did say was yes. And that was a giant mistake, because everybody knows once you tell your friends that you have a crush on somebody, what do? They go right to that person and they say, "He has a crush on you." And that's exactly what they did. And so now I was forced to talk to this girl that I had a crush on from a distance, which was just really kind of weird, but it would have been even weirder not to talk to her. And so I went up and I introduced myself, and we began to become friends. And then I got the opportunity of a lifetime to ask her if she would like to go with my family and I to the lake. And when I asked her, "Would you like to go to the lake with us?" what she should have said was no. But what she did say was yes. And so we head to the lake, and it's the last trip of the season, and things are just going so fun. We ride the inner tubes and the jet skis, and we have a really, really fun time. And then my dad has the idea. He says, "Hey, do you want to take her on one last jet ski ride before we have to go?" And what I should have said was no. But what I did say was yes. And so we hopped onto the jet ski, and man, it was beautiful outside. Like, the sun was just beginning to set. It was golden hour. It was so beautiful. And so I hit the jet ski, and we're going, and it's a blast. And then I stop, and I asked her a question that I should have never asked her. I said, "Would you like to drive the jet ski?" And what she should have said was no. But what she did say was yes. And so she gets behind the steering wheel of the jet ski, and she starts. It was fine, but it was a little rough. You know what I'm saying? And so I learned that if I'm going to have somebody drive the jet ski, I should teach them how to drive the jet ski. But we stopped, and it was even more beautiful than just moments before, because the sun was just now setting below the hills, and the trees were just beautifully lighted. It was that pink and purple and orange kind of night. You know what I'm talking about? The water was still. And I thought, this is the moment that I have been waiting for. This is when I'm going to do it. And so I asked her a question that I wanted to ask her for so long. I looked at her as we were sitting there on the jet ski, and I said, "Would you like to be my girlfriend?" And what she should have said was yes. But what she said was nothing at all. Instead, she floored the jet ski full speed going that way. I wasn't hanging on anymore, and so I went this way, falling off of the jet ski. I was in the water, and I came up, and I wiped the water out of my eyes, and I looked around, and she was gone. So far away. And there I was, just sitting in the middle of the lake with my giant life jacket up above my head, bobbing around, alone, all by myself. And she had left me. I was so embarrassed. Have you ever been in a moment like this? Not necessarily that you tried to ask a girl out and she left you in the middle of the lake, not that specific of a moment, but a moment where you were so embarrassed and ashamed of everything that had just happened in your life, and then you felt all alone, desperate for help again. There was a man in the Bible, he was a good friend of Jesus actually, who had this same feeling. It wasn't that he was dropped off on a jet ski in the middle of the lake, it was that he Well, I'll just tell you here in a second by having some volunteers come help me out. I need one person to come volunteer. That girl in the tie-dye, yeah. It's a great choice, huh? Nice. Oh, my goodness. That was almost the worst choice I ever made. Oh, no. Okay, and I need another person. I'm going to go far back. Girl in the pink shirt right there. Yes, pointing at your head. Come on. Yes, you. Yes, come on up here. Wow, but she's coming up. As she is coming up, I need you to tell me your name.
Peyton.
Peyton. Okay, you can come up. You can also come up. No, I pointed at you. You can still come. You can also come up. It's totally cool. We'll make up a character for the story. It's great. I love having more people. It's so awesome. You know what you're going to be? A fish. It's the best part of the story. So, what is your name?
Peyton.
Peyton. Where are you from, Peyton?
I'm from Kentucky. My church.
Does anybody know where she's from? She's out loud. Okay. Lexington.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let me make sure she gets home tomorrow. What is your name?
Lauren.
Lauren, where are you from?
Lexington.
Okay, you sit close with her. Lauren, what is your name?
Isabella.
Isabella, where are you from?
Georgetown.
Georgetown. Nice, nice. That's pretty close, right? So, you're going to be Peter. You're going to be fish. You're going to be Jesus tonight, all right? I need you to just stay on the stage, but step over there for a moment. All right, Jesus and fish. Do you have Jesus, come here. You're Jesus. No, you're Peter. Get over there, Jesus. Peter, come here. I got so confused. So, just so I know, this is Peter. Peter, let me introduce you. Mallory! So, we're going to start over. Jesus, fish, Peter. Unfortunately, you need to come back out here. You need to go over there. This is Peter. I got so confused. I made fun of you for not knowing where you were from, and then that was Jesus getting me back right there for doing that to you. I'm so sorry. So, this is Peter. This is fish. Jesus. Everybody got that? Everybody's super clear on where we're at right now, yeah? Okay, good. So I want to introduce you to Peter. Peter was before he was his best friend, he was a fisherman. And so Peter spent a lot of time, I need you to act this out for me, Peter, fishing for fish. I know what you're doing. There you go. And he would sometimes catch fish. You act out too. Grab the lines and yeah, he caught the fish. This is what Peter did with his life, and it was a good job. He worked with his brother and his family, and he fished for a living. And then one day, Jesus came over, and he said to Peter, "Why don't you try fishing with me?" Peter's like, "Wait a second, like real fish?" And he was like, "No, people." And Peter's like, "What? Like people bite fish hooks?" And he was like, no, I'll explain on the way. And so Peter left fishing for fish. And so if you go stand by the side over there, just stay there for a moment. Yes, he left fishing for fish to hang out with Jesus. And Peter became one of Jesus's friends. In fact, I would probably argue that Peter was one of Jesus' best friends. So Peter was in this cool group that Jesus had. We call it the inner three. It was made up of Peter, and then you met them last night, James and John. Remember the guys who tried to call fire down from heaven? Vroom. Peter, James, and John were like Jesus' best three friends. So they're really good friends. In fact, because he was such a good friend of Jesus, Peter got to spend a lot of time with Jesus, and he learned a lot from Jesus and began to understand who Jesus was. And there was this one time in Scripture where Jesus was talking to his disciples, and he asked a question, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter was the one who spoke up, and he said, "You are the Son of God." And Jesus was like, "Yes, I am. And through you, Peter, I'm going to build my church." So, James and John, they had a nickname. Do you remember it? The Sons of Thunder, grab a hammer just like Thor. Peter also had a nickname. His nickname was The Rock. Before Dwayne The Rock Johnson, he was the real Rock. Now, Jesus said to Peter, "I'm going to build my church through you." And so Peter became what I think is the very first kingdom worker. You just talked to her. she shared her story on screen. This is Peter. He became like the first one of us. Those of us who try to use our gifts and talents to glorify Jesus, our King, and to move his kingdom further and grow it bigger. Peter was number one up to bat. Sorry about touching your head like that. That was Peter. And Peter was not just like, okay, I'm some kind of casual, kingdom worker who occasionally does a good act. No, Peter was committed to kingdom work. Peter was all about this, man. In fact, there was a time in Jesus' life, kind of near the end, right before he died, that Jesus was having to have a hard conversation with his close friends, Peter, James, John, and the other disciples. And he said something like, one of you will betray me. And we all who knew that was, Judas. Don't want to be Judas. Good thing you're not Judas, right? You're a fish. I like it. So, and then after he said that, he said, all of you will abandon me. And then Peter speaks up. And he's like, yo, Jesus, even if all of these other guys abandon you, I never will, because I am with you to the end. That is Peter, one of the most committed kingdom workers in the kingdom. And, it kind of rang true because Peter is passionate about kingdom work. So, just like maybe several hours after that dinner that Jesus had to have with his disciples and kingdom workers, he went to a garden to pray, and the betrayer, Judas, led the arresting party, the government, to that garden to arrest Jesus. And there was some conflict, obviously. That's not cool. You don't arrest our king. And so Peter steps up, and he pulls out his sword, and he swings it at a guy and cuts off his ear. Whoa! That guy's name was Malchus. And then Jesus took Malchus' bloody ear that was on the ground there in the garden, and he stuck it back on his head and healed him. And Peter's like, what's up, man? I did all that work for nothing. And so the arresting party takes Jesus to where they're putting him on trial. And there's only 2 disciples. So Peter has kind of kept his promise. We don't know who the other disciple is, but we know that Peter is one of the 2 who go to where Jesus is, being held for trial and questioned. I'm going to read from John chapter 18. It says, the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. Brought Peter in to see what was going on with Jesus. You aren't one of the man's disciples too, are you? This girl asked Peter. And he replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm, and Peter was also standing there with them, warming himself. Wait a second. Did Peter, the first among us to be a kingdom worker, just deny that he was a disciple of Jesus? And it gets worse in the story. John 18 again. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there by that fire, warming himself. So they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. So not just once, but twice, Peter denies being a disciple of Jesus, a kingdom worker in the king's kingdom. And not just twice, but 3 times. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, so one of Malchus' relatives, challenged Peter, didn't I see you with him in the garden? And again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. You see, Jesus had said, Peter, you will deny me, and the rooster will crow. And Peter said, no, I won't. Because Jesus, I am with you till the end. And 3 times, he says, I don't know him. The first among us, Peter, the original kingdom worker, here he is, saying, I don't know Jesus, once so close. Now, Peter has increased his distance from Jesus. He is so far from where he once was. And then John doesn't record it, but Mark does. Mark does in Mark chapter 14, verse 72. Read this. Read Peter's response. Peter broke down and wept. One of Jesus' best friends, named Peter, broke down and wept, leaving Jesus behind. And I imagine it's in this moment when he's realized what he has done, denying Jesus and everything that he has done, he realized that he is not worthy, and that is true. But then he thought to himself, he can never love me again. But hold on, that is not true. For when we abandon Jesus, he never abandons us. When we mess up, he never gives up. Jesus, I can't see you. Where are you at? Jesus, come on back. Because you never give up, even when we mess up, right? But Peter didn't know that. Peter wasn't sure of that. And so Peter one day after that decided that he was going to go back to his old gig. Remember, before he was a fisher of men, he was a fisher of fish. Start fishing again, Peter. Your fish is that way. He went back to fishing for fish. He didn't continue to do kingdom work. He went back to the old way he had lived, neglecting the call that Jesus had on his life. And then one day, Jesus had the grace and the love to come find Peter again. And like you heard in the story, Peter was in a boat, fishing for fish. But he wasn't having a good day. Like he wasn't catching any fish. And then Jesus says, why don't you throw it on the other side of the boat? And then he catches so many fish. And they realize, the fishermen, the disciples in the boat, realize that the man on the shore is Jesus. And so they all start going back in the boat except for Peter. Peter's so excited, he jumps into it and swims like 100 yards, one football field, all the way back to the shore to find Jesus waiting for them with the breakfast prepared. I don't know what his breakfast was. Well, it was fish, I do know that. But I wish it was Waffle House because I love the Waffle House. It's way better than IHOP, that's for sure. So, you have worked out so well in this story. I'm so glad that you came up because now they're eating you. You know, they're eating fish. So, don't act it out. That's great. That's weird. But they have this moment. Jesus, Peter, the other disciples who were present, they have this moment. And they're so excited because Jesus is resurrected at this point and he is back with them. And then Peter and Jesus, they have a walk. Jesus asked him, would you go on a walk with me? And he does. And I want that was great role acting. I like that. And they have a conversation. I want to read it to you from the Bible in John chapter 21. Jesus is speaking and he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. Wait a second. What's with all the questions? Several days ago, Jesus was on trial and Peter was standing by a fire. And people started asking him questions. You're a disciple, aren't you? And he said, no, I am not a disciple of Jesus. And now, Jesus is asking Peter questions. Do you love me? What's he doing? He's reminding Peter that even though Peter messed up, he will not give up on him. And he still has a place for him in his kingdom to do kingdom work. And so he's reinstilling in Peter that passion that Jesus first saw in him. That passion to love him and to serve him and to move the kingdom forward. And they continue their walk and Jesus asked another question. Verse 16, again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. reinstilling in him that commitment that he once saw in Peter. Like the time when Peter said, even if everybody else abandons you, I never will. And he asked him a third question, for Jesus had been denied by Peter 3 times. So he asked him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And Peter said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Peter is still a kingdom worker. You're probably like, what's up with all the feed my sheep, take care of my sheep talk? This is the way that Jesus often referred to people in the world who were going to be a part of his kingdom. And he was asking Peter, would you once again take up the mantle of kingdom work and do what I have called you to do? Because even though you messed up, I will never give up on you. Because Peter, you are still my friend and there is still work to do. This is what our Jesus does. When we mess up, Jesus never gives up. Would you guys give it a round of applause for these guys right here? You guys can all go have a seat. Thank you so very much. You can hold on to those for you and take them home. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that I have a story very much like Peter. Now, I'm not really a fisherman. It wasn't my job, and I've never been around a fire and said, I don't know Jesus, when somebody asked me if I was one of his disciples. But man, by the way that I have lived, there have been moments in my life where I have certainly denied that I love him. What about you? The way in which I talk mean to people sometimes, the pride that I sense in my heart, the jealousy I have to say Jesus isn't enough, I want what they got. I don't know about you, but I've been there, just like Peter. I want to read you tonight a story. And I want to read this story to you to close my time with you. Because this story was first read to me when I was about your age. The story is about a dragon who had tempted a son and about a king who invited them back into the kingdom. I didn't write this story, but it's always good for my soul, and I hope it is for you tonight as well. There was once a great and noble king whose land was terrorized by a wicked and crafty dragon. Like a massive bird of prey, the scaly beast delighted in ravaging villages with his fiery breath. Helpless victims ran from their burning homes, only to be snatched into the dragon's jaws or talons. Those devoured instantly were deemed more fortunate than those carried back to the dragon's lair to be devoured at his leisure. The king led his sons and knights in many valiant battles against the serpent. Riding alone in the forest, one of the king's sons heard his name, purred soft and low. Lost in thoughts of restlessness and loneliness in his father's house, the young prince thought for a moment that he was hearing things. And he felt a strange hesitation in his heart. Again, his name was called. And in the shadows of the ferns and the trees, curled among the boulders, lay the dragon. The heavy-lidded eyes of the creature fastened ablaze on the prince, and his reptilian mouth stretched into a seductive smile. Don't be alarmed, said the dragon, as gray wisp of smoke rose lazily from his nostrils. I am not what your father thinks of me. What are you then? Demanded the prince, instinctively drawing his sword as he pulled in the reins to keep his frightened horse from bolting. I am more than what you've been told, my prince, said the dragon. I am delight. I am pleasure. And the prince answered nothing. He was at once fascinated and somehow afraid of this beautiful creature all at once. Noticing his hesitation, the serpent cried, "Ride on my back, and you will experience what few can only imagine, what no king has yet experienced. Come now, believe me, I have no harmful intentions. Truly, I seek only a friend, someone to share my flights with me. I am lonely." You understand loneliness. Have you never dreamed of flying, my prince? Never longed to soar in the clouds, never longed to take what isn't yours? The prince felt intoxicated. Was it the smoke that seemed to curl its way toward him with every word, or the words themselves? Visions of soaring high above the forested hills of his father's kingdom drew the prince hesitantly from his horse, and the dragon was stunning, captivatingly beautiful. The prince had never seen emerald so green as the dragon's coat. As he marveled at its strange beauty, his curiosity brought him closer. Knowingly, the dragon unfurled one great webbed wing, brilliantly adorned in gemstones stolen from some kingdom past. The dragon delighted in stolen treasure. Come, my prince, come ride with me. And in one fateful decision, the prince sheathed his sword and placed his hands and feet on the brilliant stones, climbing atop the emerald staircase to the serpent's back. And the dragon rose immediately to its feet. The prince had been deceived of its size, for now it seemed far more powerful and immense than many horses. And the creature snapped its great wings twice, launching them both into the sky. And the prince's apprehension melted into exhilaration as he felt the awesome rule of the wind beneath him and the fragrant breeze on his face. And from then on, he met the dragon often, but secretly. For how could he tell his father or his brothers or the knights that he had befriended the kingdom's greatest enemy? The serpent taught the prince many wicked things. And at first he was revolted and ashamed by them. But more and more he found himself obsessed, even captivated by his newfound secret. Quickly the prince began to feel separate from everyone. The kingdom's concerns were no longer his, and even when he wasn't stealing away to be with the dragon, he spent less time with those that he loved. More and more he spent his time alone or with the creature. And the skin on the prince's legs began to callous from gripping the dragon's rigid back. His hands grew rough and hardened. He began wearing gloves to hide the malady. After many nights of riding, he discovered scales growing on the backs of his hands as well. And with dread, he realized his fate if he were to continue to be with the dragon, and so he decided to return to the dragon no more. But after a night, he again sought out the dragon, having been tortured with desire. And so in this way, it transpired over and over and over again. No matter his determination, the prince eventually found himself pulled back as if by the cords of an invisible web to the dragon's charms. So gentle in the beginning, now held the prince more tightly than he had the will to resist. Silently, patiently, the serpent waited. He always waited. One cold, moonless night, their excursion became a foray against the sleeping village. Torching the thatched roofs with fiery blasts from his nostrils, the dragon roared with delight when terrified victims fled from their burning homes. Swooping in, the serpent belched again, and flames engulfed the cluster of screaming villagers. The prince closed his eyes tightly in an attempt to shut out the horror and the carnage, but he could not. Sometimes, he even allowed himself to feel the thrill. But then, in bitter remorse, his heart sinking in shame, he tried to hide himself, but the flames of the burning village lighted on his face. And in the pre-dawn hours, when the prince crept back from his dragon tryst, the road outside his father's castle usually remained empty. But not tonight. Tonight, terrified refugees streamed into the protective walls of the castle. The prince attempted to slip through the crowd to close himself in his chambers, but some of the survivors stared and pointed toward him. "He was there," one woman cried out. "I saw him on the dragon's back," others proclaimed. Most nodded their heads in riotous agreement. Others stared in belief and growing recognition. Horrified, the prince saw that his father, the king, was in the courtyard, holding a blood-stained and seemingly dead child in his arms. His face mirrored the agony of the child's mother. He looked up at the angry cries and found his eyes to meet the prince's. The son fled, hoping to escape into the night, but the guards apprehended him as if he were a common thief. They brought him to the great hall where his father sat solemnly on his throne. People railed on every side. "Banish him!" he heard one of his own brothers cry out. "Burn him alive!" other voices shouted. Let him burn the way he burned our homes and our children. As the king rose from his throne, bloodstains shone darkly on his royal robes, and the crowd fell silent in expectation of his decree. The prince, who could not bear to look into his father's face, stared down at the flagstone floor. "Take off your gloves and tunic," the king commanded. Was a shame not already enough? The prince had hoped for a quick death without further humiliation, but now he resigned himself to his fate. He obeyed, slowly, agonizingly, dreading to have his metamorphosis uncovered before the kingdom. Sounds of revulsion rippled through the crowd at the sight of the prince's thick, scaled skin and the ridge now growing upward along his spine. Horrible! Could it be? The thought was so ghastly, many turned away in disgust. But the king strode toward his son. The prince stilled himself. He fully expected a backhanded blow, even though he had never been struck so by his father. Instead, his father pulled him to himself, embraced him, holding him tightly, and his father wept. In shocked disbelief, the prince buried his face into his father's shoulder in a way he hadn't done for too long. Tears began to burn down his cheeks. "Do you wish to be freed from the dragon, my son?" the king asked him. And the prince answered in despair, "Father, I've wished it so many times, but there remains no hope for me." "Not alone," said the king. "You cannot win against the serpent alone. I am no longer your son. I am half beast," sobbed the prince bitterly. And he began to convulse in such cruel remorse that even the villagers pitied him. But his father replied, "My blood still runs in your veins. My nobility has always been stamped deep within your soul." With his face still hidden tearfully in his father's embrace, the prince heard the king instruct the crowd. "The dragon is crafty. Some fall victim to his wiles, for he is a great deceiver. Some fall to his violence, for he has only wickedness in his heart. There will be mercy for all who wish to be freed. For who else among you has ridden the dragon?" And the prince lifted his head to see someone emerge from the crowd. And to his amazement, he recognized an older brother, one who had been celebrated throughout the kingdom for his onslaughts against the dragon in battle and in his many good deeds for the kingdom. Others came. Some came still smelling of the smoke and sweat from the carnage in the village. Some came weeping. Others hung their heads in shame. But the king embraced them all. "You are like Peter. You are like the son. You have been tricked. You have been deceived. You have sinned and denied your love, your commitment to, your passion for, your friendship with the king. And the dragon has tricked you into believing that because of your sin and your shame, you don't have a place in the kingdom anymore. There is no work for you to do. But I'm here to tell you that is not true, because when we mess up, Jesus never gives up. And the King embraces us all. He is for us. And kingdom workers, there is still work to do.